So I want to stress, so Yamhill, do you have the PowerPoint in front of you or the Word document?
We printed the Word document, but I'm having a hard time getting the, are we supposed to be up online as well?
You don't have to be. You're fine.
Okay, well, I'm trying to get up online, but it's not working very well.
Well,
but we just print the document. We have that in front of us, so.
Yes, and that's what we're going to be going off of. And I might do these in the future where you can do them either online to see a PowerPoint, or you can just have a Word document in front of you that they be the same thing, because it's actually the easiest just to call in, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure you folks have that in front of you, because that's what we're going to talk off of today. So it's roles and responsibilities of behavior consultants. So Lori, can you hear?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So everybody's all set.
Do they want to introduce themselves to each other?
Yes. So let's start off with introductions and a little, just 5 minutes or less about how it's going in your area. You want to start with the metro area, Lori?
Sure, why not? Thanks, Joyce. Things are going very well out here. We've seen an increase in the number of referrals that have been coming through. And I think that has a lot to do with the assistance that we're getting from especially Multnomah County. Jody has been wonderful and a strong advocate for our program. So we've been doing some ombudsman meetings. We have 2 more that are coming up. We also did a joint venture talking to individuals with APS in Multnomah County. So we are seeing quite a few or consistent number of referrals that are coming through at this time. Columbia has actually been a strong advocate for this program as well, and they're continuously, sending in referrals from time to time. We are in the process of completing 2 mentorships for part-time consultants, and there are 2 others at this time that we are trying to or getting ready to put through training in June. So things are going quite well.
And fast. Sounds like it's changing fast.
Yes,
and I know
it
you met with Jenny Hedrick and have worked out your training plan for the next little while.
Yes.
Yamhill County, do you want to tell us who all is there and how it's going for you folks?
It's Mindy Thomas and Lacey Plasker and Liz Fernley, and things are going really well here. We have a meeting later this month to talk about starting Polk County, and otherwise things are going pretty smoothly.
And I know you folks are going to be meeting with Jenny also, and Jenny Hedrick, and she's going to be coming over to do some problem solving with you all and work with you on your cases.
Right, next month.
I'm sorry, what?
Right, next month.
Yes. So the southern region, which is really covers a full half of the state now, is joining us a few minutes late. She had to finish up a meeting, and then Eastern and Central are just now getting going, and the Eastern, John, have you come online? They're should be calling in soon, so people are just a few minutes late. And so Megan Hornby is here from APD Services, and so Megan, how's it going there? And anything to tell everybody?
Okay, hi. This is Megan. Linda Wilkie is usually the person who represents the state at these calls, but Linda is over in Deschutes, and they are all doing their kickoff training for Central Oregon. So I'm here today to kind of talk about issues from the state perspective.
Great. Okay. So we'll get started with the topic today. And I want to stress that this is discussion. So, and all of you folks that I'm talking to right now are newer at this, so you may want clarification questions. You may not have actual cases that are giving you questions at this point, but please even though we're all on the telephone, please feel free to just break in and then we'll say, what's your question? And because it's probably something that everyone is curious about.
Yeah, remember the purpose of these calls is to make sure that the behavior consultants out there are getting the information they need. So if you have a lot of questions about something, even if it seems like it's a little off topic, go ahead and raise them, and that can be stuff that Jenny and Joyce work on for a future conference call.
So, starting in roles and responsibilities of behavior consultants, what we are going to touch on today are common areas that you run across out in the field doing behavior consulting, and this is in APD work, aging and people with disabilities. So this purposely is built around that client group as how we're providing these services. And on your handouts there you see red lights, green lights, and yellow lights. And that the red light column on all of this is that the stop. Let me start with the green light one actually. So the green light column is that's what behavior consulting services at APD is. Yellow is, well, there might be more considerations, and sometimes it could become a green light after considering it a little more, or might be a red light depending on the circumstance. And I'm sorry, I'm just having problems with my voice. And then red light is definitely something that is a questionable practice for a variety of reasons in APD, and that's what we're going to cover a lot today. Megan, do you want to say anything else about red lights?
So I think what we don't want you to walk away from this presentation today and think that we're telling you, you know, absolutely never do any of these things. What we're trying to give you is a framework to, when you're in the middle of a consultation, to know when to slow down and question what you're doing, and when to actually stop and kind of go up the food chain before you proceed any farther. You know, check with your manager, your supervisor, or your supervisor manager, someone like Lori may need to call the state and double check something. So we're just trying to give you a framework for how to navigate working in the APD system. One of the problems you're going to encounter, and the reason we're bringing this up is because we see every new behavior consultant runs into this problem, is you're going to see a lot of things that aren't working well. Case managers who don't have time to do what they're supposed to do, people not getting mental health services when they should get mental health services. So you're going to see a lot of things that need fixing. And we want to make sure you're focused on your unique role and your unique service, because that's where you're going to be the most effective, and that you're not trying to fix things that aren't within your world to be fixed. So we hope that this will be helpful, but we need your feedback on it. So if we're saying something that you know you do, speak up, because I need to understand why you do it, and we need to either help you not do it or change our perspective. So I hope there's dialogue about this stuff.
Any questions so far? Okay, so we'll move along to the first area on your sheet, which is behavior assessment. And the green light column is a general. We know this is what behavior assessment is. We're getting information from those people that know the client well. We're maybe collecting a little bit of data, direct and indirect. We are getting information from the client if we can, if they're verbal, if they're able to communicate. And we're going to records, especially the most recent ones, and sometimes the ongoing CNA notes or nurses' notes or behavior incident reports if those happen to be available, and assessments of different kinds that would be in their file. And of course, in some places there's not much records at all, but that's what we've going off of is what we have available. Now the yellow light in this area is if there is a mental health diagnosis or there's symptoms that aren't significant to the behavior issues, then we don't need to go in depth in that in the assessment. When we do training, and all of you have been through, you were all through fairly extensive mentorship, but when we initially do training, we're looking at all these possible, like dementia and all these possible medical issues and on and on and on as possibilities of things that impact. Well, if those don't impact, we don't have to even think of them in the assessment. You can just move right on ahead out of those and just focus on those things that do impact that particular behavior. An example might be if someone is diabetic and they also have, they like to spend a lot of money for various reasons, but the money isn't necessarily an issue, and it has to do with their some compulsiveness in their behavior, but it's just not an issue. But the diabetes is causing them, the behavior issue that's been identified is that they are constantly looking for food and arguing with people about how much they can have at a meal. Well, then that's the behaviors that we want to really focus in on, and that's the diabetes has been the most relevant issue there. Is that making sense to everybody? Lori, Mindy, you guys, does that make sense? Okay. And I think I know all of you well, and I know that you all have a lot of experience sorting out what's the relevant ones. And then the red light is what if we're hearing the most common source of these unsubstantiated stories are going in, and care staff might have all kinds of different things that they've heard about this client, or they know about them, stories that followed them to that site that someone else passed along. The story might be about something they had experienced years and years ago, or sometimes the personal character traits come forward. Oh, for instance, I had a situation in mentorship at one point where the family member had said, this was a client who was really very hard on the caregivers, and they were having a lot of issues with the client giving them a really hard time when they came to do anything with her. And then the family member said, well, she was grouchy her whole life. Well, that doesn't really that's not relevant to what that person's issues is at this time. Plus, we don't need that information really, but that's the kind of things you'll hear. Well, he's always been that way. I remember when he was 25 in the community, now he's 65 and doing such and so. And you'll hear those, but those are the things that we can just discard again. Jenny, will you comment on things you might have encountered?
I just want to add one extra thing is something that we come across sometimes where it's questionable is you might find information in the person's file that's related to family history or events that happen in the person's life, and we have to be careful about writing things in an assessment that if a family is going to receive a copy of the behavior assessment that might cause, or if anyone reviews it, family member, relative, if it's a relative.
Doesn't go to the file.
But if that's going in the assessment,
if that information ends up in the behavior plan at all, then that's not something we want to go there. I'm sorry. We're a little confused about where the behavior assessments go between Jenny and I, so I'm sorry for that little bit of confusion on that part. But what you are saying, Jenny, about...
Or even from verbal reports. If you're interviewing family, a different family member, say, and you're getting information about history and you're putting that into the assessment where as another family member may see that, that's where it can get questionable. One of those gray areas.
Right. Questions before I move on? Does this seem pretty clear to everybody? Yes? No?
Yeah, it's clear. Can you hear me, Joyce?
Yes.
Okay.
Very well. Okay, then go on to the behavior plan. And the behavior plans are designed for contextual fit. We want to reflect the client's values and goals, and we want good routines to be in there, and we want buy-in of the care staff. That's just a general summary of the behavior plan. Then in the yellow area, we want to be sure that we're balancing what's important for and what's important to a client, especially when it comes to significant health or mental health issues. And sometimes the client will want something that's just not possible, either monetarily or otherwise, and so that might be something that is just not, it becomes a red light issue, but maybe we can do a modification of that. And I think all of you are real familiar with all of mediating what's important for and what's important to. The particular issue that I run into now and then in looking at behavior plans is that adverse kinds of things, we have to be really careful how we write up, give the client time and space, because then it can move to something that the client would find very adverse, like people leaving them for 15 minutes while they calm down. I'll come back when you're calmed down. That might be what the caregiver's thinking. Well, that, of course, is not what we do. If someone is really having a hard time, sometimes we need to stay there with them. We just want to be sure that we don't have anything that looks like timeout, acts like timeout, is timeout, and that we're isolating people, because that's a punishing kind of thing. Megan, do you have any comment?
Well, one of the things that I think, and I'd like to know how you guys are handling this, but you are working with caregivers who haven't been exposed to positive behavior support concepts. And so I think that this is an example of a critical teaching area where it can be flipped over to the green column if in the behavior plan there's very clear directions to caregivers on when someone's yelling and screaming and needs to have less stimulation in the room, how does the caregiver exit in a way that's helpful to that person? Because the caregiver is going to revert to, for a lot of our caregivers in our system, giving someone time out is not seen as adversive. So your behavior plans are going to have to move them to that next level of what do they say to the person so the person doesn't see they're leaving the room as a rejection, abandonment, criticism, or something else. So I think that this is an example of where good teaching, good behavior plans, a lot of detail for the caregiver can make something that might be a stop into a go. Have you guys encountered that yet?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have, but I think it's helpful in the training when you're doing the staff training with them also to reiterate what you've written in the behavior plan, different styles and how you can say things differently so that that client is not being offended by saying, hey, let's take a little break and readdress this in a few minutes and things like that. And it seems to be more clear to them.
Yes, and how you frame it in a positive sort of way rather than you're having a problem, so I need to just get away from you for a little bit.
Right, exactly.
And it might be that you would say, well, I need to go change that laundry into the dryer, so how about giving me about 5 minutes, and then I'll come back and we can talk more about this, and I won't have to be interrupted. so you can kind of help them with that space issue. Any questions, comments? This should all be fairly straightforward to all you folks. You might have more questions in the parts that are going to come up. So we're going to move on to medical.
Yeah, usually I make statements that are black and white enough that people should have comments. Because remember, I'm speaking from theory here up in the big house in Salem, and you guys are in reality, so you need to push back a little bit. So medical. We very carefully in this program did not include requirements that behavior consultants have licenses of any sort. Some of you do, but we didn't require that. And one of the reasons we didn't require that was that we didn't want to duplicate nursing assessments, mental health assessments, or the kind of services that are paid for in other Medicaid programs. So that being said, we also recognize that everybody's behavior is influenced by their health and their medical conditions. So you guys do get into a lot of red light, yellow light areas in this area of medical. So the green light for this area is that when you're doing an assessment, developing the behavior plan, you do need to get information about diabetes, for example. If there's power struggles over food, you have to understand somewhat about the person's diabetic issues and how that influences their daily routine. And so you might need to call a doctor or the nurse to find out about, does that person have to have their meds in the morning when they really hate being woken up at 6 o'clock? Can their medication be given at a different time of day? All of those kind of questions are part of good information gathering that we would expect you to do. And we would expect you to pass the information you learned on in the behavior plan somehow. When you get into the yellow light is when you guys find yourself reporting to a doctor or a nurse, well, don't you think this person's medication could be changed? Or have you guys thought, why is this person on 5 different psychotropic medications? Couldn't they be on 2 or 3? So what do you guys think is the problem with doing that? Why do you think I put that in the yellow? Okay,
because we're not a professional.
Yeah, that's one of the things. And the other thing is that you're going to hear me say a lot is, are you teaching? In other words, if you've got a foster home provider who's very uncomfortable calling a doctor and saying to a doctor, why is this person on so many medications? You may need to model for that foster home provider how to talk to a doctor, how to talk to a doctor on behalf of the client. And in that situation, or the nurse, that may be a teaching opportunity that's really valid, because you're teaching the caregiver how to report a concern. But if you're not teaching that and you're just doing it, then when you're not there, it's not going to happen. So the yellow in this medical area is usually can be flipped over to a green area if you're teaching and if you're modeling. The same way on escorting people to medical appointments, or actually working with nurses and pharmacists about medications. Again, if you're not teaching the activity, you're not modeling it, it's probably duplication. It's probably some primary caregiver, the foster home provider, or the person's nurse should be doing. So any questions about that issue? Because I know that when I've seen behavior plans and stuff coming up, I know that you guys sometimes are in the middle of this between the caregivers and the healthcare system and trying to figure out when you should be there and when you shouldn't.
Jana, I know you just came on. Can you hear us? Jana?
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So we are on the medical piece, and that was Megan talking.
Yes, I recognize your voice.
Okay. So say again your question.
So I just want to double check my assumption there that, you know, the overall thing here is that unless you guys are teaching or modeling how to work with the healthcare system to caregivers, you really shouldn't be in direct contact with nurses and physicians or pharmacists, other than during your assessment phase when you're trying to understand the impact of the person's health on their daily routine or on their behavior. So any disagreements with that or concerns or wondering why you find yourself in the middle so much?
This is Jana. I think that the CRNs like to pull us in, to be honest, and they like to be involved in the loop. So are we not allowed to keep them updated then?
Okay, so that's a great question, Jana. The CRN says that those are the long-term care nurses that work with our persons in home and foster homes on an ongoing basis. And many of them, before we had behavior supports, were expected to do some version of behavior supports, which they usually didn't do very well. So they are definitely an example of somebody who the case manager, you could check with the case manager and just find out, is the case manager passing on your progress notes, your behavior plan to the nurse? Would the case manager like you to do that for them? You know, sometimes it's faster if you guys pass on your information rather than triangulating it through the case manager. But double check with the case manager. I think the nurse is a really good person to get information from. But again, when a nurse is asking you to talk to the physician or talk to the pharmacist, that nurse is de facto asking you to do something that's her job or something that's the case manager's job, and you're duplicating a service. So worst case scenario is we're using Medicaid money twice to pay the nurse medication management, care coordination, and to pay you guys. So I think that would be almost in the red zone of if you have a nurse that's asking you to go to a physician's appointment or to talk to a physician or pharmacist. I think that that's something that should go up the food chain a little bit, where the behavior consultant should talk to their supervisor, and the supervisor may want to call myself or Linda Wolke, because the nurses are paid to work with physicians and pharmacists. Does that answer your question, Jana?
Yeah, and they rarely ever ask us to do that. I think that it's pretty clear, but they do like to be involved in the loop, some of them, not all of them. So they like us to email them our notes sometimes, and at least the behavior support plan they like to have a copy of. So that's okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think sharing information with them is great, and they can really help in your teaching of caregivers about the impact of a person's medical condition on their behaviors. So right. You and the nurse together can do some great teaching.
Okay.
All right. And the next one, the financial or benefit management. Again, I think a really good creative behavior plan will be identifying activities and things and social events and activities that are really, really helpful and preventative and quality of life focused. And I get real excited when I see this information finally getting into behavior plans. This is what makes things person-centered. However, the problem happens when the behavior consultant starts to go out and obtain TVs or get better furniture for the room, or starts to try to track down the person's SSI money so that they can purchase their cigarettes on their on the field trip or something. And again, it all goes back to that teaching framework of, if you're doing it and then you're gone, how is that primary care provider going to learn how to do it? So navigating the system to try to get financing for extra furniture. All of that stuff, case managers are really the expertise at. And they should be the person who's the point person, the go-to person for the administrator of an assisted living or a foster home provider or even a client-employed caregiver. I know that sometimes it seems much faster to do it yourself, but that isn't going to be the lasting solution. And again, I'd rather pay a behavior consultant 4 hours to teach, maybe along with the case manager, caregivers on how to access a person's personal PIF or personal incidental funds, or how to navigate the system out there where people can get free furniture. You know, I'd rather see you guys spend 4 hours teaching that stuff than 1 hour doing it. Because then when the client 5 months from now says, oh, gosh, I'd really like to redecorate my room and have a more comfortable chair so I can do more reading or more magazines, that caregiver knows that they can go down to the community warehouse and get the comfortable chair. They know how to do that. And maybe because of your teaching and your modeling, they'll take the client with them and the client will choose the chair. So again, it's teaching and modeling. These things are the yellows turn into green. But if you're not teaching and modeling it, then we have a really hard time justifying it as a behavior support service. And then obviously the yellow is, you know, other than I don't think these are really happening, but I just kind of threw them in there as kind of extreme cases. You know, there's some real problems if you're actually calling and setting up mental health appointments. You know, there's some questions about whether the scope of your confidentiality extends that far. Do you have authorization to set up another Medicaid mental health benefit? So, you know, when you're actually actively setting up benefits or purchasing things, again, you might be falling into that case manager role. But again, if you feel free to add, the yellow and the red are really cautionary things, that these are the points in time as a behavior consultant we'd like you to stop and think, are you teaching? If you're teaching, probably go ahead and just document it very carefully. If you're not teaching, check with your supervisor, check with Salem to see whether you should be doing this or whether someone else should.
And Megan, if you would, again, go through, where does Medicaid stand on those red things, that they're very concerned that there's no duplication of service, correct?
Yeah. So we don't have rules yet for this program. So this is why some of these things are still pretty, to throw another color in here, gray. We don't have clear rules, and we're learning as much as you are where we need to be specific and where we don't. But we do need to make sure that we are clear about who is the point person, what case managers do, what nurses do, and what behavior support people do, because we're paying you all out of the same Medicaid bucket, the nursing facility waiver Medicaid bucket. And so we need to make sure that when we're paying you to teach somebody how to communicate to a healthcare professional, that we're not paying that same nurse to do that same thing for that same client. Because someday, not in the next year or so, someday auditors will come through and they will look at these things and they will say, well, wait, why on May 13th did Jana call the doctor about medication, and then here's the nurse who on May 12th called the doctor about the same medication for the same client. And we want it to go back to showing, well, Jana was trying to figure out how that medication impacted the person's evening routine, because they're trying to change the person's evening routine so that bedtime is not such a huge power struggle. The nurse is calling the doctor to see whether that dose was accurate, and did the doctor know the side effects. So these things, they can happen simultaneously, but they need to happen within your sphere and your role. Is that making sense to people? Is anybody scared? I don't want to scare anybody. All right. Have you guys been pulled into doing any of these things?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'll admit it.
Yeah, and I want you to admit it, because, again, we're designing a brand new service, and we don't know how to design these things. It's like building a house, and lots of times people will start to put in a window, and someone's got to say, wait a minute, there's supposed to be a door there. I mean, it's nobody's doing anything wrong here. We're just designing something.
Right. I think a lot of it, Megan, is it like what you said earlier, is it's easier for us to do it ourselves. It's just easier for us to call the case manager and get that voucher for the TV. It's just easier. And so sometimes it's just our social worker nature to take care of those things.
Yeah. And I really, I think that's the important thing here, is that you're hiring good behavior consultants because they like to go in and be creative and fix things. And problem solve. And yet we're kind of starting to say, well, there's some areas where we want you to teach but not fix. And I think that's a really hard thing to do when you've got a client in front of you who needs something. But again, we want we really want to make sure that people spend most of that 20, 40 hours on teaching. And it takes some expertise for people to learn how to get through the assessment and the behavior plan stage fast enough that they can get into the teaching stage. But this is a teaching program. So we'll have to get better and better tools to help people remember to do that. And then the next one is consultation, and again, the teacher role. It's definitely okay to do anything that you're modeling, demonstrating, using group, one-to-one teaching, and carrying out that behavior plan. So anything that links back to that behavior plan and the client's needs and teaching people how to meet them is all in the green. When you start going to meetings and you're providing information on that behavior plan to people other than caregivers, case managers, nurses, doctors, that's in the yellow. And the only reason it's in the yellow in my mind is because have you spent all the time you should be spending with a caregiver? You guys are the only people in our system, other than the nurses are allowed to teach caregivers health-related stuff. You guys are the only people in the system who are paid to teach caregivers. So we just want to make sure you're spending your time with the caregivers and not these fellow professionals, because the person's day-to-day routine, what happens in the morning, the afternoon, 10 o'clock at night, that's where the gap is that this program is trying to fix. So a lot of this is just using your time wisely and making sure you're not spending more the time with professionals that you should be spending with caregivers. Where it gets into the red and the stop is when you're really providing information and spending time with non-service related activities, like going to hearings, participating in evictions. Those are not Medicaid-funded activities. So, for example, when nurses get subpoenaed to go to a hearing, we have to pay them with general fund to do that, okay? Because it's not a Medicaid-funded service to sit and help with a legal process like an eviction. Likewise, again, if you're setting up mental health appointments, that's a case management function. It's not a behavior service function, and we really can't be spending Medicaid on it. And like I said before, I'm not sure that your confidentiality extends over to mental health. But again, I think that the important thing here is if you're training caregivers, you're pretty much fine. If you're training and teaching other professionals, you may be fine if you're not spending too much time on it. It's just a practice issue. It's not a regulatory issue. But if you're really not doing anything that's service-related, that's connected to the person's 24-hour day, you need to stop and double-check up the food chain whether you should be doing this or whether there's somebody else, or whether we need to pay you to do it if you've been subpoenaed out of another pot of money. So again, questions about this, concerns?
Megan, this is Lori. I just have one question on this.
Yeah.
And what happened is we did get one client, and as soon as we got the client, there was already an eviction notice put in place. But the case manager, provider, and the client wanted us to sit in at the facility for a pre-hearing call. And during that call, they wanted us to immediately come up with strategies. They've never heard of this program. So we worked immediately coming up with strategies, training, coaching the provider, the caregivers, doing team meetings. But they wanted us to sit in on that initial meeting right off the bat. Was that okay to do?
Well, again, what was the purpose of you being there?
The purpose of that is they wanted the behavior consultant to work with the provider and the client in determining what are the exact behaviors, because the ombudsman was involved before we got involved, because they felt that the eviction notice from the provider wouldn't wouldn't hold up, and they had some questions regarding it. So that's kind of why we were brought in, is to look at the overall picture and start working with the behavior problems the client had immediately, and to put that eviction on hold.
Well, so I think, so here's where I would say it could switch over to yellow. If you sat in there and you gathered information, listening to everybody about the client's behaviors, about the circumstances, what had happened, and you're using that information to develop a positive behavior support plan.
And that's what we did.
Okay, but the minute you open your mouth in that kind of pre-hearing and start to give ideas and directions, you're participating in a regulatory process, and you could inadvertently, there might be some strategy going on, say between the licensor, the provider, and the case manager, you know, about they might have some strategy about moving the client out that you don't know about, and you might be undermining that strategy. You might be giving information to the ombudsman who isn't necessarily doing what the case manager thinks is best for the client. The hearings people really don't care what's best for the client because, I mean, they care, but what they're looking at is purely administrative rule and who's violating what. So it's just fraught with problems if you guys participate and are starting to give recommendations in these legal or quasi-legal situations. But if, like you were talking about, if you've come on the scene, you're going to be sticking with this client whether they're evicted from this placement or go to a new placement, and this is perfect time to get lots of information, then yeah, I would be saying this is something that could be flipped over to yellow or green.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you for that clarification.
And I think that's a good example of how these things are not necessarily static. I would like to be able to give you a complete, you know, advance, you know, go 50 miles an hour in this place, go 30 here, but it's not that prescriptive. This is more a way to think about stuff. All right, I'm going to flip it back to Joyce.
I'm going to just do a quick minute on the trainer, and then we have some more time for questions with Megan and discussion of what we've just gone through, because it's actually some things that you folks encounter now and then and would like some guidance on, I would think. So the last one here is on trainer, and you're providing training, again, on positive behavior support and specifics to the behavior plan support strategies, and then also doing ongoing training as you have determined in the action plan. And I just want to say it's best practice to start out a little bit with something about positive behavior support as you're starting to do a behavior plan, rather than just read the plan with the, it's a time to do a little bit of training on what positive support is, and that we're looking at communication and the reasons that this person is doing these behaviors, and we're going to know that or the reason behind it is why these support strategies have been selected, so that they're learning the process of, I call it looking with the person's eyes, with the client's eyes. We're trying to see the world from their point of view a little bit, and if we're giving, and that's what positive behavior support is about, is understanding the point of view of the client. And so as we're putting that perspective on a behavior plan, that'll help the caregivers know how to adjust in the future to the client's needs. So a yellow area would be, I would just caution about adding kind of vague words like give reminders or directives to clients. Go do such and such to the client. It's time for your bath now. We have to be really careful of those kinds of things. And when we use the reminder word in our behavior plans, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So think in terms of the caregivers and what they're going to understand. And being a little more specific than not is helpful. Sometimes you could, to the behavior plan, you can attach a sheet of possible ways to phrase directive, possible ways to phrase reminding them that their schedule's going to do such and so, and maybe it's time for a visual schedule, for instance, rather than having reminders come through the day. Then the red part is actual face-to-face counseling with clients and skills training, really. For those with a DD background, they would understand it as skills training. When we're working directly with the client and we're in the behavior plan stage, we're leaving out a caregiver, and that's our role is as a consultant, so we want to be sure that caregivers are there. We would be modeling how to work with the client or talk with them rather than doing that without a caregiver there. That makes sense to everybody? Okay, so I'm going to turn it back to all of you folks and what questions you have here for the last 5 minutes, especially with Megan sitting here with us on these issues, because we put, it's like a can of worms, and we've put a little bit of verbiage to that can of worms, but there's a whole lot of issues associated with all this. And Yamhill County in particular, Liz and Lacey and Mindy, you may have run up against a few of these, but you also can think about situations that could come up, and how would you handle those? So go ahead.
I think we've been running into, this is Mindy, running into some chemical dependency issues that have led to some behaviors. So that's played a part in some of it. And we've been very careful to make recommendations to the provider, but not going as far as, you know, making an appointment or calling and getting them set up with anything. It's just basically, hey, it would be a good idea to, you know, have them, if they agree to go to a group, or recommend them seeing a provider for this, but, you know, we're not setting something up ourselves. The other thing that we're running into a lot of is in the larger facilities that have, you know, 50 to 100 or 150 people in them. We're having a hard time with the caregivers actually being able to sit down with us for any length of, you know, even 5 or 10 minutes to get their input or to help train. Even after we've been able to develop a behavior plan, it's been very difficult to get folks to sit with us at all. So that's been a real challenge.
Well, yes, I can relate. Jana, I'm going to draw on you for some hints for them, because you've also been an administrator of those kind of programs. And so what kinds of things do you tell consultants to do to get that time with the caregivers in bigger facilities? Jana, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, Todd was asking me a question, so can you re-ask that question?
Yeah. So in big facilities, even 50, 150, Yamhill County was saying they have a hard time getting time with the caregivers, even 5-10 minutes to find out what's going on with clients. What suggestions do you give behavior consultants as they're starting to work in those situations, how to get time to find out what's going on with the client?
Okay,
let alone training.
Yeah, well, you know, we always talk to the administrator or to the service coordinator to try to set up the times, but shift change is the best time to go because you can usually just get in there for 5 minutes, and and ask them about a certain person, especially if you pre-warn them that you're coming, they'll be prepared for that. At each shift change, so even going in on when PM shift switches over to Knox or whatever, another tool you could do is just leave a notebook or a piece of paper that you put in their communication book that just says, can you tell me a little bit about so-and-so and kind of what you're looking for specifically. And then we do most of our trainings in big facilities at their monthly all-staff meetings or spot trainings at the shift changes also.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Can I add a couple suggestions too? Just something that was helpful during mentorship was trying to talk to the staff during meal times, the caregivers during meal times, and just really following them throughout their whole shift, and of course getting their approval ahead of time, but just going right with them. I know those two worked really well for me.
Could you guys hear Jenny?
Could you hear that, Mindy?
I could hear that. The only thought I have about that is, you know, it would be difficult to maintain confidentiality about a client when you're following them around all day, trying to, you know, address concerns.
And this was more so to gather some of the other, you know, the person-centered information that we need in the assessment. So that is a really good point about the confidentiality. But more so to get a good observation during those times as well. So it was helpful to get a lot of the big picture information that we needed for the assessment.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found helpful this is in assisted living in particular, is where I use this, is I would, when I would get on site, I would ask, well, I'd always just focus in on, I would ask the administrator who are key caregivers that I should talk to. And they would name usually somewhere between 2 and 3. And then I would go, okay, where do I find them? And so then they would direct me to that spot. And then I'd say, I would like 20 minutes of your time, no more than 20 minutes of your time, sometime today. When would that work? And usually they would find sometime within the next hour or so. And I could always do record reviews and other kinds of things as I was filling in. And then I always was really good about not keeping them more than 20 minutes. And so I found that they could spend that time. I rarely had people that couldn't pull away for a few minutes. But they did have approval of their administrator, basically, to be able to come talk with me for a few minutes. So I just found that worked. And so I would give them kind of a advanced warning and let them choose the time when we might sit down, which you probably also have done. And I want to also say on the part of making recommendations to go to drug alcohol groups or something like that, that's a good place on that behavior plan to put down other supports that are needed. That's an extra note to case managers and to facility administrators that this is a part that they could follow up on later. That's really why that part is there. What are some other services we could be helpful?
That's where we're putting it. So basically we're putting that as a recommendation so that they can follow up on that and take the lead on that if they're willing to do that.
Perfect place to put that. Okay, well, we're at the close of our time, and so does anyone have any other questions, comments?
Joyce, this is Jana. I wanted to add one more thing that my girls do. They kind of do a generic behavior support plan when they're first getting involved, you know, at places that it's tough to talk to all the staff. So they'll just kind of do a rough draft and then leave it for the staff and tell them to write all over it.
Oh, that's great.
Excellent.
So this added thing. And then they scribble all over it, and then we pick it up.
That would help direct their comments then, too. It gives them some framework to go on. Good.
Right.
Okay, well, thanks for everyone participating. And if you have comment after this, after you digest a little more of what we've said, and this is going to be on tape also. I'll be sending you the link soon. Then feel free to email Jenny, myself, Linda, Megan about any of those comments or questions. And thank you. That's it for today.
Thanks,
Bye.
Joyce.
Bye-bye.